Imagine waking up tomorrow with an extra $1 million in your bank account. What would change? Would you finally feel confident? Would you stop worrying? Would success suddenly become easy? Now here's the strange part. One of the most successful self-made millionaires in America started with almost nothing, failed repeatedly, struggled with learning difficulties, was constantly underestimated, and spent years being told she wasn't smart enough to win. Yet she built a business worth billions. And according to her, the biggest thing standing between most people and success isn't money, education, connections, or even talent. It's the conversation happening inside your own head. Today, we're diving into the incredible life lessons, wealth-building strategies, and success secrets of Barbara Corcoran, the real estate mogul, entrepreneur, and Shark Tank investor who turned a $1,000 loan into an empire. And some of the advice you're about to hear completely goes against what most people believe about success, because Barbara says being underestimated might actually be your greatest advantage. But before we get there, there's one story about her childhood that explains almost everything. A story that nearly convinced her she'd never become successful. And if you've ever doubted yourself, felt behind in life, or wondered whether you're good enough to achieve your dreams, this story might completely change how you see your future. Barbara Corcoran wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't the smartest student in her class. In fact, she struggled throughout school because of dyslexia, long before people widely understood what it was. Teachers often assumed she wasn't intelligent. She constantly felt like she was falling behind. Many people would have accepted those labels. Many people would have allowed those early judgments to define the rest of their lives. Barbara didn't. But she didn't become confident overnight. She experienced the same self-doubt that nearly everyone experiences. The difference was that eventually she learned something powerful. She realized that the voice inside her head wasn't always telling the truth. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you told yourself you're not good enough? How many times have you convinced yourself that someone else is smarter, more talented, more capable, or more likely to succeed? Barbara believes those thoughts become dangerous when we repeat them often enough, because eventually, we stop questioning them, we start believing them, and once we believe them, they begin controlling our actions. That's why one of her most powerful lessons is something she calls changing the tape in your head. Imagine your mind is constantly playing a recording. Maybe that recording says, "I'm not smart enough, I'm too old, I'm too young, I don't have enough experience, I'll probably fail." Barbara argues that success starts when you deliberately replace that recording with a different one, not because you're lying to yourself, but because your current story may already be a lie. The people who achieve extraordinary things aren't necessarily the people with the most confidence. They're often the people who learn to stop listening to the voice telling them they can't. Now before we continue, let's take a closer look at the woman behind these lessons, because understanding Barbara Corcoran's journey makes her advice even more powerful. Barbara Corcoran is one of the most recognizable entrepreneurs in America. Most people know her from Shark Tank, where she evaluates businesses and invests in promising entrepreneurs, but long before television fame, Barbara was building one of the largest real estate companies in New York City. She started with a tiny loan of just $1,000. That's it. No wealthy investors, no family fortune, no massive advantage, just determination and a willingness to learn. Over time, she transformed that small beginning into the Corcoran Group, a real estate company that became one of the most influential firms in New York. Eventually, she sold the company for tens of millions of dollars. She became a best-selling author, a television personality, a business leader, and one of the most respected investors in the country. But what's fascinating is that Barbara rarely attributes her success to being the smartest person in the room. Instead, she often credits traits that many people would consider disadvantages. Her dyslexia, being underestimated, being overlooked, being doubted. In her view, these challenges forced her to develop creativity, resilience, and determination. And that leads directly into one of the most surprising lessons she shares. Barbara says being underestimated can be a superpower. Most people hate being underestimated. They want recognition immediately. They want others to notice their abilities. They want validation. Barbara saw things differently. When competitors dismissed her, they stopped paying attention. When people assumed she couldn't win, they lowered their guard. While they were looking elsewhere, she was quietly improving, learning, and preparing. Think about some of the greatest upsets in sports history. The favorite often loses because they assume victory is guaranteed. The underdog often wins because they know they must work harder. Barbara believes the same principle applies to business and life. When people underestimate you, they often give you something incredibly valuable: freedom. Freedom to improve without scrutiny. Freedom to experiment. Freedom to surprise everyone. The next time someone doubts your abilities, consider this possibility. Their doubt may actually be creating your opportunity, because while they're busy overlooking you, you can focus on becoming better. And that brings us to another major lesson. Many people spend years trying to figure out their purpose. They read books. They watch motivational videos. They wait for clarity. They hope some magical moment will reveal exactly what they're meant to do. Barbara doesn't believe that's how purpose works. She says you have have to get into the traffic of life. Think about driving. You can't figure out where all the roads lead while sitting in your driveway. You have to start moving. You have to explore. You have to take turns. You have to discover what works and what doesn't. The same is true for your career. Barbara worked many jobs before finding her path. She didn't begin with certainty. She began with action. And that's a lesson many people desperately need to hear. You don't have to know exactly where your future leads. You only need enough courage to take the next step. Action creates clarity. Experience creates wisdom. Movement creates opportunity. The people who wait for perfect certainty often remain stuck. The people who start moving usually discover opportunities they never could have predicted. And once Barbara found her opportunity, she developed another principle that transformed her career. She became obsessed with preparation because she knew she couldn't rely on natural advantages. She had to create advantages. When others prepared a little, she prepared more. When others expected average results, she aimed higher. When others became comfortable, she kept improving. That mindset eventually helped her build one of the most respected businesses in New York. But success wasn't always smooth. In fact, some of Barbara's biggest victories came directly from her failures. And what happened next completely changed the way she looked at setbacks. Most people see failure as evidence they should stop. Barbara sees failure as information. One failed project in particular taught her a lesson she never forgot. She invested time and energy into a video project called Homes on Tape. The project failed. Most entrepreneurs would have viewed that as wasted effort. Barbara didn't, because that failure exposed her to new technology and new ways of marketing. That experience eventually helped her embrace the internet earlier than many competitors. And that decision created enormous opportunities later. In other words, what looked like failure at first eventually became an advantage. How often does this happen in life? A rejection leads to a better opportunity. A failed business teaches skills that create future success. A mistake forces growth that wouldn't have happened otherwise. The problem is that most people judge events too quickly. They assume today's setback is the final chapter. Barbara reminds us that sometimes failure is simply the beginning of a better story, and the next lesson might be the most important one of all. At this point in Barbara's journey, she had already learned something that separates high achievers from almost everyone else. Success is rarely about avoiding problems. It's about becoming the kind of person who can solve bigger problems. Most people spend their lives searching for comfort. They want fewer challenges, fewer obstacles, fewer difficult situations. But Barbara discovered that growth often lives on the other side of discomfort. The challenges that seem unfair today may actually be preparing you for opportunities tomorrow. And nowhere is that more obvious than in leadership. When Barbara began building her company, she quickly realized that businesses don't grow because of one talented person. They grow because of teams. The quality of your team determines the quality of your results. But here's where Barbara's approach becomes very different from what many leaders do. Most employers focus heavily on resumes, degrees, experience, credentials. Barbara certainly values skills, but she pays close attention to something else. She looks for what she calls fire in the belly, that internal drive, that hunger, that determination that can't easily be taught. Think about it. Skills can often be learned. Knowledge can be acquired. Experience can be gained. But genuine motivation is much harder to create. Barbara believes that when someone has a powerful desire to succeed, they'll often find ways to overcome obstacles that stop everyone else. That's why she became fascinated by people who had something to prove, people who refused to quit, people who kept pushing forward despite setbacks. And interestingly, this same principle affects your personal success as well. Ask yourself, are you pursuing your goals because they genuinely matter to you, or because someone else told you they should matter? People who achieve extraordinary things usually have a strong emotional reason for doing what they do. Their goals aren't just goals, they're personal missions. And missions create persistence. Persistence creates results. Barbara also developed a leadership philosophy that many modern managers completely overlook. She believed that employees needed to know their leader was genuinely on their side. Not pretending, not acting supportive, actually supportive, because people perform differently when they feel trusted. They perform differently when they feel valued. They perform differently when they know someone believes in them. Think back to a teacher, coach, friend, or mentor who believed in you. Chances are you worked harder around that person. You wanted to prove them right. Barbara understood this human psychology exceptionally well. She knew that great leadership isn't about controlling people. It's about empowering them. It's about creating an environment where talented individuals can thrive. But there was one thing she refused to tolerate: complaining. Barbara became famous for eliminating chronic complainers from her organization. Now that may sound harsh at first, but her reasoning was simple. Every workplace faces problems. Every business faces challenges. Every team encounters setbacks. The question isn't whether problems exist. The question is how people respond to them. Some people see a problem and immediately look for solutions. Others see a problem and spread negativity. Barbara believed negativity could spread through a company like a disease. One person constantly complaining could gradually influence everyone around them. Energy matters. Attitude matters. Mindset matters. This doesn't mean ignoring legitimate concerns. Constructive feedback is important. But there's a massive difference between someone trying to solve a problem and someone simply spreading frustration. One moves the organization forward. The other keeps everyone stuck. And this lesson applies far beyond business. Pay attention to the people you spend time with. Do they inspire action? Or do they constantly focus on reasons things won't work? Because attitudes are contagious, whether positive or negative. Now let's talk about something almost everyone encounters at some point in their career: asking for more money. For many people, this conversation feels terrifying. They know they're working hard. They know they're contributing value. But when it's time to ask for a raise, uncertainty takes over. Barbara's advice is refreshingly practical. She says emotion rarely wins these conversations. Evidence does. Instead of simply saying, "I think I deserve more money," she recommends documenting exactly what you were hired to do. Then compare it to what you're actually doing today. Create a clear list. Show how your responsibilities have expanded. Show the value you're creating. Show the additional work you've taken on. Then make a specific request. Notice what this approach does. It transforms the conversation from an emotional argument into a business discussion. You're not asking for a favor. You're presenting evidence. And that's an important distinction. Whether you're negotiating salary, pitching a business, or trying to persuade someone, facts are often more powerful than feelings. The stronger your evidence, the stronger your position. Now let's shift to a topic that affects nearly every ambitious person. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of rejection. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of making the wrong decision. These fears stop countless dreams before they ever begin. But Barbara's life offers a different perspective. Throughout her career, she experienced rejection repeatedly. Deals fell apart. Ideas failed. People doubted her. Investments didn't always work. Yet she continued moving forward. Why? Because she understood something many people never learn. Rejection isn't always a verdict. Sometimes it's simply information. Imagine if every successful entrepreneur quit after their first rejection. Imagine if every athlete quit after their first loss. Imagine if every inventor quit after their first failed attempt. The world would look very different. Success often belongs to people who remain in the game longer than everyone else. They keep learning. They keep adjusting. They keep improving. Eventually, persistence begins to look like talent. But underneath that success is usually a long history of setbacks nobody sees. One reason Barbara became such a successful investor on Shark Tank is because she learned to evaluate people differently than most investors. Many investors focus almost entirely on numbers: revenue, profit margins, growth rates, market size. Barbara looks at those things too, but she also studies the person standing in front of her. Because businesses don't execute themselves, people execute businesses. And according to Barbara, the founder often determines the future more than the idea. She pays attention to how entrepreneurs respond when things go wrong. Do they make excuses? Do they blame everyone else? Or do they take responsibility? That distinction reveals a lot about character. When someone constantly blames external circumstances, improvement becomes difficult. After all, if every problem is someone else's fault, what can you improve? But when someone accepts responsibility, they gain power. Because responsibility creates options. It creates learning. It creates growth. Barbara consistently looks for founders who own their mistakes and learn from them. And honestly, that's a valuable lesson whether you're building a company or simply trying to improve your life. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything. It means focusing on what you can control, because that's where progress happens. Now here's another fascinating observation Barbara has made. Many people assume confidence comes first, then action follows. Barbara's experience suggests the opposite. Action often creates confidence. Think about riding a bicycle. You don't become confident first and then learn. You learn first. You wobble. You make mistakes. You improve. Eventually confidence appears. The same pattern exists in business, careers, relationships, and personal growth. Confidence isn't usually the starting point. It's the result. And that's great news, because it means you don't need to wait until you feel ready. You don't need perfect confidence. You don't need complete certainty. You simply need enough courage to begin. The people we admire often weren't fearless when they started. They were willing. And willingness can take you remarkably far. As Barbara's story continues, you'll discover perhaps her most powerful lesson about wealth, success, and building a life that truly matters. So if there's one thing Barbara Corcoran's story makes impossible to ignore, it's this: success didn't come from being the smartest, the richest, or the most qualified person in the room. It came from how she responded when things weren't going her way. When she was underestimated, she used it as fuel. When she failed, she treated it as feedback. When she felt doubt, she changed the story in her head and kept moving anyway. And that's the part most people miss. Because life doesn't reward perfect timing. It rewards consistent action in imperfect conditions. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to stop waiting for the right moment and start building momentum with the moment you already have. Change the tape in your head. Stop repeating the same same limits to yourself, because the more you hear them, the more you believe them, and the more you believe them, the more they shape your decisions. And your decisions shape everything. The truth is, most people won't fail because they weren't capable. They'll fail because they stopped too early, right before things could have started to shift. So the real question is simple. Are you going to stay where you are because it feels familiar, or are you going to move even while you still feel uncertain? Because if Barbara Corcoran's life proves anything, it's this: the version of you that succeeds is built through action, not intention. So don't wait to feel confident. Start moving and let confidence catch up. And maybe, just maybe, the life you're trying to build isn't as far away as you think. It's just one decision away. If this message hit home, subscribe, because the next one might hit even harder.